is common sense. I always said for every question there's an answer. For every difficulty you can overcome it. If you think long enough, you can come up with an answer. That's my personal thinking. And I think that if you use common sense, you should probably survive if you're lucky enough. But I'll tell you this, if you're up there long enough, you're going to get hit. And a few years back at the 44th convention, they come up with it was a sheet of paper with General Bradley's had a poem on it about a rifleman going from, he goes to one hill, and behind the hill is a river, behind the river is another hill, behind the hill is another river all the way through, and eventually, if the war doesn't end, he's going to get hit. And I found that this is the truth. You have to be lucky. And, I think that common sense is the only thing that brought me back alive.
Tell me about the Vicks.
Oh yeah, I was starting to tell you about why I didn't get trench foot. I used to have my wife send me over Vicks Vapor Rub. Now I felt that if it got, you put it on your chest when you catch cold or, you have a cold in your chest. I used to put, and it would, you'd get heat from it. So I used to put it all over my feet at night. And I wore 2 pairs of socks, and I had another 2 pair in my cartridge belt. And every day I would take the 2 pairs that I had on off, put it in my cartridge belt, and take the 2 other ones, and the dry ones, and put them back on. And I used to take my boots off in the foxhole. And the guys used to say to me, if we get attacked, you're going to be running barefoot. I said, well, that's what I got to have to worry about. But I'll tell you this, I believed never to bunch up. If you stay by, if you're with 4 or 5 people at a time, you're going to be a target. If you're by yourself, they usually go for the group because they stand a better chance of getting them. Now, we were always told, in basic training, that you don't have to shoot a guy between the eyes. Aim for his chest, because it'll take about 6 or 7 people to take care of him back in the hospital, and it'll be that much less they'll have for the line. So I guess that's what most of the soldiers did. I assume they did anyway. Next question.
Did resistance stiffen or lessen as you moved into German territory?
Was this what?
Did the Germans put up a stronger fight as you moved into German territory?
I would say yes, but I think we had them on the run so fast, that I think that it was a little bit easier than I thought it was going to be. Now, I would never, a lot of people would follow behind a tank. I always stayed, a fellow by the name of Rocky Ardillo. He was my second gunner. He fed me the belt for the machine gun. And Rocky and I, we were very close, and I remember Rocky saying to me, I said, gee, Rock, it's funny. We're living out in water. We're living in water up to our neck, and living in foxholes and the cold and everything else. And I said, it's remarkable that we don't catch cold, we don't have, rheumatism or anything else. And Rocky said to me, he said, Joe, how do you know what is in the food that they feed us, the shots that they give us? He says, when we get to be 40, he said, we're young now, he said, when we get to be 40 or 50 years old, he said, that's when we're going to start feeling it. Mm-hmm. Now, Rocky, he died at 55, and he was in a wheelchair the last 5 years of his life. I still correspond with his wife. And Rocky was from Fredonia in New York. And whenever I go up to Niagara Falls, and I used to go up about every 3 or 4 years, I'd always stop into Fredonia where he lived and saw him and his wife. And his wife wrote, we only correspond by Christmas cards, and that's about it. Next question.
What was your moment of greatest fear?
I honestly don't know. I'll tell you one experience that I guess you weren't fearful, you never will be. I was crossing, I think it was either the Eller River or the Nectar River. I think it was the Eller River. Now, we got there about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And the company commander and the battalion commander said, we will wait until nightfall. So in the meantime, they had the mortars fire across the river, smoke grenades, so they couldn't see what we were doing. Now, the Army brought up what they call assault boats. They weren't much better than a canoe, to be honest with you. We had to paddle across. We got as far, well, the Eller River was pretty wide, and the Heinies threw in a armor-piercing shell, and it lasted about, it went about 30 feet from the boat, but an armor-piercing shell hits the bottom and blows. And when it did, it blew us upside down, blew the boat right up. We lost everything. I lost the machine gun. When I went in the water, I took off everything I had, even my helmet, because I had to swim probably from here to the front desk, which is far enough. And I'm not a long-distance swimmer, believe me. And Rocky and I were the only two that got to the other side. The rest of them, I think, went down the river, but they joined us later, so they were all right. Now, I always said, if I took my pants off, now this was in February, we still had chunks of ice floating in the river. I said if I took my pants off, they'd have stood up right by themselves. They were so frozen. Now, they knew that, believe it or not, Rocky and I got over. I dropped everything that I owned. My cartridge belt. See, when you're a machine gunner, I carried a tripod that weighed 48 pounds. Rocky carried the barrel that weighed 45 pounds loaded. Now they say water cool, but we had antifreeze in them. That's how cold it was over there. When we got over, believe it or not, we didn't even have a helmet to dig a hole. Now, we were on the German side, and we didn't know whether they were coming at us or what it was, but we captured. I can't say we captured him. I think the guy gave up, a little German. He must have been, I'd say probably in his 50s. We captured him. Now, we were over on the German side. They never shot at us or anything. But down the river, about 1.5 miles, they blew a bridge out. The Germans did, or we did. I don't know who did it. But the Army engineers came up with a tank, and they had a tree hung on the end of it. They lowered it, put the tree on it, put it across where the bridge is blown out, and they send a couple of riflemen up to get us. Now, can you imagine walking with your pants frozen and everything else frozen, walking 1.5 miles down? We took the little German with us, and we had to go hand over hand, and I said to the German, "You're going in front of me, because if there's any baloney, you're the first to go in." So we got over the other side, and they were afraid that we were going to get pneumonia from being in the water and being so cold, so they sent us back to a hospital. Now, I always thought that from something bad always comes something good. And believe it or not, I thought it was about the worst thing that ever happened. But it turned out to be one of the best things that ever happened. I was in the hospital. The battalion got caught up in the Fern Pass, and 2/3 of them got wiped out. Now, they sent back to the hospital asking if there was anybody capable of walking that knew anything about horses or mules. Well, I was raised on a farm. I used to have a riding academy because I was born during the Depression. And I knew quite a bit about horses. I still do. But I kept my mouth shut. You know, you never volunteer for anything in the Army or anywhere else. So I know that an awful lot got killed and an awful lot got wounded. And I'll say one thing. Our general, he was a man's man and a soldier's soldier. He was the best. And from what I was told, I was not in the Fern Pass battle because I was in the hospital. But I was told that General Dean sent a squad up behind, through the mountain behind them, and they came in and they bagged the guys. They had an 88. You see what happened? We were coming through there. I'm told this. They were going through the Fern Pass. Now, the mountains, they twirl. They had the bridge. When they got by a certain spot, they blew the road behind them so they couldn't go back, they couldn't go forward, and an 88 was on the other side, and they were just peppering them with 88s. And boy, I'll tell you, those 88s were accurate. We had 90s, but I think that the 88s was as good or better than the best. So I wasn't in on that battle, but we did go through the Brenner Pass. We linked up with the 10th Mountain Division in, I think it was Innsbruck in Italy, and that ended the war for us. Our sector was the first to end the war, in our sector, and then 2 or 3 days later the whole war ended. So I remember another incident when we took Remling in France. We were set outside Remling, I don't know, for 3 or 4 weeks. And they couldn't move, we couldn't move. So what happened, they decided that there was a salient in the line and they wanted to straighten it out because they were getting ready for the push to end the war. So I was carrying a tripod which weighed 48 pounds, and remember, you got about a 40-pound pack on your back on top of it. Plus you've got a helmet, which I still have at home at this day. I still have my canteen. When I got, somebody stood up and they said, pass it back. He said, we're sending back 2 prisoners and I don't want any harm to them. He said, we're going to interrogate him. He said, that's the way it did in the Army anyway. You pass everything back to the next guy and he'd pass it back to the next guy. So, to make a long story short, when I got up there, the guy that fished him out of the hole was our General Dean. Can you imagine a general? He had no business even being up there. He belongs behind the lines. But he wouldn't ask you to do anything that he wouldn't do himself. I mean, the guy was caught up in the Fern Pass. And when the prisoners asked, is that true that your generals are up this close? And they said, he is. And General Dean, he was the one that was captured in Korea. And he took a lot of the 44th Division men with him. The colonels mostly. And in his book, The General Dean Story, which I have at home, it's out of print. I borrowed one from the North End Library in Bridgeport, and I wanted to buy it, and the thing was, it was ruined, it was all torn apart. So my daughter got on the internet or something, I don't know, with a computer, I don't know too much about them. But she said that there was 2 available. She paid, I think it was $53 for a book that was sold probably for $15 or $20 at the time. And I still have it home and it's in perfect condition. So that's about it, I guess. Do you have anything else you want to ask me?
Do you recall when you heard the news that Germany had unconditionally surrendered?
Do I have, what was that again, please?
Do you remember when you heard that Germany had unconditionally surrendered and the war was over in Europe?
Yes, and it didn't take long for them to send us back to the United States. We all come back. I went over and came back on the Queen Elizabeth. And we were scheduled to go to Japan. Now at the time, I don't think Truman even knew we had, they planned way ahead of time. Now I'm commander of our American Legion post at the north end of Bridgeport, Grosso Seawee Post 167 American Legion. And Tony Liberto, he's the treasurer of our post. He's got a rifle home. He said, in the Pacific where he was, he said they skipped a lot of islands. And I was wondering why they were doing it. But he was on the PT boats. And he said our job was that when they tried to get off the island to get food or ammunition or anything else they could get, that we were to capture them. So Tony told me that 3 of them tried to escape in a canoe to another island. And he said, we intercepted them. And he said a Japanese major shot himself so he wouldn't be captured. And he said, I have the rifle home. He said, I was offered $60 for it. And Mariel, my wife, was with me. And I said to him, I'll give you 100. And I would. He's got it home. I said, how'd you get it home? He said, in pieces. He said, I'd send the stock one day, I'd send the barrel the next, I'd send this the next. So, and you know, I'm also active in the, well, all Veterans Affairs. I'm a life member of the Grasso CV Post, American Legion. I'm a life member in the Battle of the Bulge. I'm a life member in the Veterans of Foreign Wars. I'm a life member in the Battle of Combat Infantrymen's Association. And I also belong to the Catholic War Vets. I belong to the 71st Infantry Regiment Association, and naturally the 44th. And I don't know whether you ever heard of the 40 and 8 or not, but the 40 and 8 is the Fun and Welfare Society of the American Legion. You cannot get into the 40 and 8 unless you are asked. Now, you have to have done something for the Legion before you can get into the 40 and 8. I happen to be chef de gare of the 40 and 8 for Fairfield County. That's the county. There's only one in each county. And that includes 32 American Legion posts. We draw from them. For some reason or other, the Legion, the VFW, all these veterans organizations are not, people are not joining them. I don't know why. Probably there's too much other stuff for them to do. But I would suggest that, you know, politicians, all as they believe in is numbers. And you know, the American Legion wrote the GI Bill of Rights. And a lot of people went to college because of the GI Bill. The government loans you money. Some of them pay it back, a lot of them don't. So I think that they should